Legal history is made in a landmark moment at the Old Bailey. The sentencing of a murderer was televised for the first time in England and Wales. Gemma Mitchell was given life in prison with a minimum of 34 years for killing her friend and dumping her decapitated body.
You have shown absolutely no remorse, and it appears that you are in complete denial as to what you did, notwithstanding what, in my judgment, amounted to overwhelming evidence against you.
Well, we'll be assessing the significance of that live broadcast from the Old Bailey, also this lunchtime. Christmas elections set to be called in Northern Ireland after the deadline passed for power sharing to be restored. Elon Musk says his takeover of Twitter is sinking in. But what will it mean for free speech on social media? A tale of two communities in the West Highlands coping with the cost of living. One has seen energy bills soar and the other hasn't. And cash is king. The Royal Mint starts making new 50p coins featuring King Charles III.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, England's hopes of progressing at the T20 World Cup hang in the balance after their match against Australia is abandoned because of rain.
Hello, good afternoon. In a moment of legal history, the sentencing of a murderer has been televised and broadcast live for the first time in England and Wales. An Old Bailey judge gave Gemma Mitchell life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years for killing her friend from church and then dumping her decapitated body in Devon. The judge described her as extremely devious. Well, our correspondent Laura Foster is at the Old Bailey. Laura.
Mitchell has become the first murderer and the first woman to be sentenced on television in England and Wales, following a change in the rules allowing cameras into court over the summer. Today at the Old Bailey, nearly all of the police officers who worked on this case were present, and the victim's family were watching via video link from around the world.
Mi Kuen Chong, also known as Deborah, was a devout Christian. It was through the church that she met Gemma Mitchell, a woman she described as her spiritual healer. But that friendship turned into murder, all because Mitchell wanted to inherit Deborah's estate. Today at the Old Bailey, the judge concluded that Mitchell was extremely devious, sentencing her to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 34 years.
There is the chilling aspect of what you did to and with her body after you had killed her. You have shown absolutely no remorse, and it appears that you are in complete denial as to what you did, notwithstanding what, in my judgment, amounted to overwhelming evidence against you.
It was on the 11th of June last year, Mitchell set off for Deborah's home carrying a large blue suitcase. When she emerged from the property with Deborah's body inside, Judge Richard Marks said it was clear from this CCTV evidence that she had injured her hand, and that must have occurred in the course of the killing. It was more than 2 weeks later before Mitchell travelled from her London home to the seaside resort of Salcombe in Devon. This CCTV shows the car being driven just 50 metres from the woodland where Deborah's headless body was later found. A statement by Deborah's sister, Amy Chong, was read out by the prosecution in court. I can't begin to believe how we will begin to move on with our lives without Deborah in it. I hope justice is served. Gemma does not deserve my sympathy. I hope she gets what she deserves. She's the crazy one who steals people's belongings after they die. It will be 34 years before Mitchell will be eligible for parole in what Judge Marks described as a profoundly shocking case.
Before the sentencing, Mitchell could be seen waving at her mother in the public gallery and blowing kisses. But as her sentence was passed, Mitchell shook her head repeatedly. As she was taken away from the dock, her mother put out her hand and waved goodbye. There are lots of questions about this case that will never be answered. Why did Mitchell keep Deborah's body for a fortnight? Why did she decapitate her? Well, as part of her degree, Mitchell was taught anatomy and had experience of dissection of human bodies. Judge Marks told Mitchell that this stood you in great stead when you cut off her head, although why you chose to do that remains a mystery.
Laura, thank you very much. Laura Foster there at the Old Bailey. And with me now in the studio is our Home Affairs correspondent, Tom Simons. Tom, quite a moment to see that televised sentencing. Assess for us the significance of it.
Well, of course, Ben, anybody can go along to the Old Bailey and watch a case like this in person and see justice happening in front of their eyes. But this really has opened up, to a certain degree, what happens in major trials in Crown courts. It was, I think we'll agree, enlightening, and it was also, in this case, very shocking. And I think that was what the government wanted. They wanted people to be able to see the courts as open and transparent when they changed the rules in 2020 to allow filming in courts in England and Wales. It's already allowed in certain circumstances in Scotland. But there are very strict rules, and the rules say that there has to be a senior judge involved. You just saw the beginning and the end of the sentencing, just the judge on camera, nobody else allowed to be seen in the court. And that is because there were concerns when the rules were changed that witnesses and victims and jurors would not want to take part in trials. It was also said that judges might be put under pressure, either physically or threatened, or that might be an issue for them if they were to appear on camera. But I think it will be seen as a success. And I don't think we're going to see much of an extension of this system for some time, because if you think about it, the concern about juries and trials becoming entertainment are upmost in the judiciary's minds. And I think you can't really see how you could extend it beyond what we saw today.
Tom, thank you. Tom Simons. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, has finally taken control of the social media platform Twitter in a deal worth £38 billion. He's reported to have fired a number of the firm's top executives already. Well, it brings to an end an on-off takeover saga that's been going on for months now. Mr. Musk, the boss of Tesla and SpaceX, says he believes in absolute free speech. And there is speculation that some people who've been banned from Twitter, including the former US President Donald Trump, could now be invited back. Here's our North America technology reporter, James Clayton.
When Elon Musk made a surprise entrance into Twitter this week, he was carrying a bathroom sink. "I'm in Twitter HQ, let that sink in," he said. Elon Musk is one of the most famous businessmen in the world. The South African-born tycoon already runs Tesla and SpaceX, along with several other companies. He's phenomenally successful. Tesla is the most valuable car company in the world. But it seems he had designs on a social media company. It's been a long road to get here, an unbelievably topsy-turvy deal. It's worth reflecting on it. When Elon Musk had an offer accepted to buy Twitter in April, he could barely contain his excitement. But that initial enthusiasm soon began to wane. Tech stocks were plummeting, and many wondered whether he'd paid too much for Twitter. Mr. Musk tried to pull out of the deal. Twitter, though, wasn't having any of it. The two sides were due to face a judge who would decide if Elon Musk had to legally buy the company. But then another reversal. Suddenly, Elon Musk did want to buy Twitter. Officially, he said he was buying the company to create the Everything app called X, the details of which are still sketchy. But it's also likely that Mr. Musk believed he would have lost a court case and wished to avoid facing a potentially damaging deposition. So what does this deal mean for the future of Twitter? Well, it appears as though Mr. Musk is going to sweep aside Twitter's top executives, including its chief executive Parag Agrawal. It means Musk would be free to enact his vision of free speech. That may well mean that one Donald Trump, banned from Twitter after the Capitol Hill riots, will be invited back onto the platform. The controversial US president, though, now has his own social media platform, Truth Social, and has said he won't reactivate his account. We'll see. Things are never dull with Elon Musk. Expect lots of ideas, lots of changes, and lots of uncertainty at what Mr. Musk describes as the world's virtual town hall. James Clayton, BBC News.
Let's talk about this live now with our technology editor Zoe Kleinman, who's in Glasgow. What sort of changes could this mean to Twitter, do you think, in the future?
I think the thing that we're going to look out for, first of all, is whether he sticks with his promise to ease moderation. He said he wants Twitter to become more of a haven for free speech. Twitter's long been accused of favouring liberal left-wing messages, which it's always denied. And he says he wants to open that up more, although he's since rode back on that slightly and said this doesn't mean he wants it to become a free-for-all hellscape. Those were his words. So perhaps he's realising just quite how chaotic that might prove to be. The other thing that I think is really interesting is this idea that he's hinted at but not ever elaborated on, which is this everything app, you know, the idea of this thing called X. We don't have anything like that really in the West, but in China they do. It's called WeChat, and it's like a one-stop shop for everything. It's where you do your shopping, your social media, your messaging. It's where you order your pizzas. You know, are we ready to have something like that here? And could Twitter be it? The fact is, Twitter hasn't really done a lot. In all of the years that it's been here, it's been pretty stagnant. It's stuck with doing the same thing. It's kept with the same amount of users. You know, something needs to happen, and maybe what he does next to shake it up, we'll finally see it start to grow.
We shall see. Zoe, thank you very much indeed. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has been defending his decision not to attend the COP27 climate change summit in Egypt next month, arguing it is right for him to focus on economic challenges here at home. Here's some of what he had to say.
I think everyone will remember that last year we hosted one of the most significant COPs in recent time, and that was important because what we did there was set the targets and the roadmap for the world to follow if we're going to meet our climate ambitions. And I think actually everyone should also be really proud of how we're doing. We're one of the countries that has decarbonised the fastest. We now get over half our energy from zero carbon sources.
Prime Minister there. Let's talk to our political correspondent Jonathan Blake at Westminster. He has been criticised for not going to this COP27 summit, but he's defending his decision there quite robustly.
Yes, Ben, and it was never a given that the Prime Minister would attend the COP27 summit in Egypt next month, but his predecessor Liz Truss, while she was in office briefly, was expected to attend, and some world leaders from other big economies, France and the US potentially, may well be there. So Rishi Sunak's decision to stay away has left the UK looking for some like it's not treating the efforts to tackle climate change with the priority that it should be. Labour certainly are leading the criticism of Rishi Sunak not going to COP27, saying that it's a failure of leadership and that he should be on the world stage convening others to tackle this huge issue, which is linked to the energy supply crisis and the cost of living in general. But for Rishi Sunak, he clearly wants to stay in the UK and focus on what he says are pressing domestic matters, namely the budget expected in the middle of next month. And on that, there are fresh warnings about the scale of what is to come. Sources at the Treasury talking about a massive black hole to fill and saying that people should not underestimate the scale of the challenge or how tough the decisions are. What will those decisions be about which taxes to put up and where to cut spending? Well, the Prime Minister would only say again today that the government would act fairly and to protect the most vulnerable.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Blake there, our political correspondent. A new election to the Northern Ireland Assembly may be called today after the deadline to restart power sharing passed at midnight. The election is likely to be held just before Christmas, probably on the 15th of December, after a political crisis that has meant months of deadlock. Well, back in May, for the first time, the Nationalist Party, Sinn Féin, won the largest number of seats in the Stormont Assembly. But the biggest unionist party, the DUP, has refused to restore power sharing because it says Northern Ireland's place in the UK has been undermined by the post-Brexit trade deal signed by Boris Johnson. That deal, the protocol, means that goods transported from Great Britain to Northern Ireland are subject to checks. Well, it's thought yet another election may only deepen divisions in Northern Ireland. Our Ireland correspondent, Chris Page, has the very latest.
As autumn turns into winter, voters here are set to go back to the polls. Another Stormont season has come and gone without the formation of a devolved government. The party, which became the largest in the last election in May, blames the Democratic Unionists for the deepening crisis.
It's not a question of disagreement among the parties. It's not a question that the parties can't agree to form an executive. The DUP are preventing all of the other parties who want to form an executive from doing so. There isn't a need to have an election. I understand the frustration of the public and of other elected representatives. There was an election in May. The problem we have is the refusal to honour the outcome of that election.
But the DUP says its voters are backing its position to stay out of Stormont for now.
We went to the people in May this year and we made absolutely clear that we could not, in all conscience, nominate ministers to an executive that is required to impose a protocol that harms our economy, harms our people, and prevents us getting access to medicines and other vital supplies from the rest of the United Kingdom. That was the mandate we were given by the people who voted for us.
The political system in Northern Ireland is different to almost everywhere else. It's based on the Good Friday Peace Agreement, signed in 1998 after a long conflict. A majority of Unionists and Irish nationalists must agree to share power for a devolved government to be formed. The DUP says it won't join a coalition until the Brexit trade border with the rest of the UK is scrapped. In the election 5 months ago, Sinn Féin became the first nationalist party ever to win the most seats. But the DUP remains the biggest unionist group, so it still has a veto. Power sharing here has always been fragile. Devolution has only been properly operating for little more than 2 out of the last 6 years. Northern Ireland is now heading into its 4th Assembly election over that period. The impact of political paralysis is being felt widely. Business leaders say potential investors are being put off.
We understand there are difficult political issues there, but for businesses, we need decision making. We've had, as I said, 6 years with really no decisions being made, and we've got many areas that need to be looked at.
The most imminent decisions will be made by the public. After the midnight deadline passed, the Westminster government came under a legal duty to call a Stormont election. But campaigns in Northern Ireland tend to create more divisions, not bring politicians together. Cleaning up the political debris afterwards may make resolving this crisis even more challenging. So the rather splendid building, which is meant to be the home of Northern Ireland's devolved Assembly and Government, has officially fallen silent. At midnight, the local ministers who had been in office just in a caretaker capacity recently had to leave their roles altogether. So civil servants are basically running this part of the UK from here on in. It's over to Westminster, and the Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris has tweeted he's extremely disappointed that a power-sharing executive wasn't reformed, and he says he's going to give an update on his legal obligation to act. The Stormont parties are working the assumption that the Assembly election will be held 10 days before Christmas. When you speak to just about anyone in Northern Ireland, it isn't hard to detect that there's very little enthusiasm for the idea among both politicians and the public.
Chris, thank you very much. Chris Page there, our Ireland correspondent. And the time is just 18 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. Jailed for life, a woman who killed her friend and then dumped her body. The first murderer in England and Wales to have their sentencing televised. And coming up, Swedish engineers in the final stages of developing the first ever crash test dummy to represent the average woman.
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, Lewis Hamilton says he has no intention of retiring anytime soon. The 7-time world champion is yet to win a race this season and is currently 6th in the World Championship standings ahead of the Mexico Grand Prix.
Now, the cost of living crisis has been driven in large part by soaring energy bills. And we've been taking a look at how those energy costs affect different geographic areas. In the West Highlands of Scotland, 2 picturesque communities have very different experiences. In one, energy bills are well above the UK average. But in the other, a hydroelectric scheme means there's been no increase at all. This report from our Scotland editor, James Cook.
Winter is coming, and in the Highlands, they're worried. Energy bills here are way above the UK average and rising. Life in rural Scotland does bring great rewards. Just look at the scenery for a start. But it also comes with great challenges. And many people here will tell you those challenges are now intensifying. This community ferry hops to and fro between Glenelg on the mainland and the Isle of Skye. But the cost of diesel to run it has jumped 70% in the past year. How difficult is that as a business?
Well, it is difficult because we always run on really quite tight margins here, and we're still expected as a social enterprise business to meet rising costs with very small profit margins. It does make me really nervous as to how we might be able to continue in the way that we are.
At the heart of Glenelg village is the hall, but it's not cheap to maintain, especially when the electricity bill has soared from £800 a quarter to more than £4,000.
There's a church group, there's indoor bowls, indoor football, kids' youth club. They're going to have to look, can we run our club, can we not run our club? So if we increase our prices, there's no way that we can run the hall at the costs that are currently given.
All right, Rona.
In the Glenelg Inn, energy is not the only worry. Brexit and a lack of affordable housing have made staff hard to find, and inflation is pushing up the price of supplies.
I really love this business, but it is becoming much more challenging for me. I'm a bit scared about going into next year. I'm scared about the staffing issue, the prices, the power prices, obviously.
Sail south, though, and it's a brighter picture. This is the Knoydart Peninsula, accessible only by boat or a 2-day hike. That means it's not on the national grid. Power here comes from this hydro scheme, run by a community project called Knoydart Renewables.
If it wasn't for Knoydart Renewables, the population, which is about now 120 with all the businesses, which are paying all the taxes they're paying, wouldn't be sustainable economically. We'd probably have 20 or 30 people living here with tumbleweed blowing down the streets.
And you're effectively insulated from this energy emergency that everyone else is facing.
The energy emergency has no effect on us in terms of our electricity production.
In the local brewery, they see the hydro as a blessing.
We're not going to be receiving the same price hikes that grid-based consumers are.
So for you, how important is this hydro scheme to keep you going?
It's critical, really is. So we know we'll be able to keep the lights on and keep the beer coming.
And that sense of confidence is shared throughout this community.
There's more people here, there's more new businesses, there's triple the amount of kids in the school than there was when I was there, and there's room for development. So I'm building a house right now, and it means that I know that I will be able to have power, which is obviously very important.
Optimism, yes, but it's confined to this rare corner of the country without an energy crisis. James Cook, BBC News, Knoydart.
The latest figures on COVID levels in the UK are just out, based on a weekly survey which is carried out by the Office for National Statistics. And our medical editor Fergus Walsh is here with me to explain what we know about the figures. Fergus, what does the latest data tell us?
So the figures, Ben, say that around 2 million people across the UK would have tested positive for COVID in the week up to the 17th of October. That's around 1 in 30 people, and it's unchanged from the previous week. So some reassurance there, some variation around the UK. There's plenty of COVID circulating, but it looks like the autumn wave of COVID may have peaked, because Omicron has been around for nearly a year now. Some of the impact denting that wave may be down to more than 10 million people now have had their COVID autumn booster. Of course, it's not the only virus that's circulating. Flu, it had almost none in the last couple of winters, so little natural immunity about. Those levels of flu are rising, especially in young children. Young children are eligible for a nasal spray flu vaccine, 33 million people in all eligible for a flu jab. And then there are other viruses, RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, which can cause chest infections, norovirus, the vomiting and diarrhea bug. So there's plenty of viruses around every winter. All of them can put pressure on an already pressurised NHS.
OK, Fergus, thank you very much. Fergus Walsh there, our medical editor. A team of Swedish engineers are developing the first ever crash test dummy to represent the average woman. Women are more likely than men to be injured in the same types of crash, and some scientists say this is partly down to a lack of representative dummies to test vital safety features. Shona McCullum reports now from Sweden.
Crash test dummies are used to test how well car safety features protect people against injury, but not everyone is equally protected. Women are 3 times more likely to suffer whiplash than men if they're in a car that's hit from behind. And although whiplash isn't usually fatal, it can cause serious and permanent disabilities. Sarah's car was hit from behind last month.
It was a really big shock at the time, and my daughter was absolutely crying her eyes out. Her neck was hurting. She's had a back as well. Got a stiff neck and shoulders. The anxiety of, are you going to be able to do your job because of your aches and pains?
Some scientists say more representative crash test dummies are an important step in improving car safety. Engineers here in Sweden have been busy working on the first crash test dummy that represents the average woman.
In order to ensure that you identify the seats that have the best protection for both part of the population, you definitely need to have the part of the population at highest risk represented.
Currently, the industry predominantly uses average male dummies in car safety tests, although there are a number of dummies with different weights, ages and sizes. The crucial point, though, the average female is not represented.
You can assess how it interacts with the seat during the crash and also how well it protects the occupant.
Dr. Linder's dummies are designed specifically to test how well cars protect people from injuries in low-impact rear collisions.
Females are somewhat shorter and lighter than males on average. And then we also have differences in muscle strength, which plays a role in terms of how you respond to a crash.
The engineers are performing tests on the dummy to see what happens to her in a simulated rear crash.
You see that this is a very low severity. It's 7 km/h. There will probably not be a scratch on your car, but you see the amount of motion that goes on in our body.
It's taken decades to get here, but Dr. Linder's work, which will be published next month, brings with it hopes that women will one day be safer behind the wheel. Shona McCallum, BBC News, Sweden.
Cricket now, and England's hopes of reaching the semi-finals of the Men's T20 World Cup are in the balance. That's after their match against Australia was abandoned. Persistent rain throughout the day in Melbourne meant the game never got underway, and it leaves England probably needing to win both their remaining matches to have any chance of progressing. Ireland's game against Afghanistan was also washed out earlier. Manufacturing has begun of the new 50p coins featuring the image of King Charles III. It's based on pictures of the monarch from his 70th birthday. Well, our correspondent Hal Griffith has been to the Royal Mint in South Wales to take a look at the new coins.
Freshly minted and coming to a till near you. The new 50p is the first of the Carolean coins. For now, they're under tight security. You need special permission just to touch one. But from December, they'll circulate alongside the Queen's coins, which won't be withdrawn. Keeping the currency current is a significant moment. Martin was the man charged with creating the image and getting everything in proportion, knowing eventually his work would end up in millions of pockets and piggy banks.
You don't want to make it, for example, too cheerful, because this is a serious, very serious symbol, and yet it needs to be light enough to put across his humanity. It's getting in the subtlest of possible ways those emotions rather than, as it were, ears or nose or eyes.
These days, cash isn't really king. Only 15% of payments are used using coins and notes. But having a mnemonic on the money still represents the biggest change here since decimalisation.
The buildings Her Majesty opened housed the processes involved in the converting of blank discs into coin, decimal naturally, and in
The Queen and then Prince Charles saw for themselves how much it took to strike new sovereigns. All part of the process that goes back over a millennium.
We've actually been around as long as the royal family has, so we've struck for every monarch, including from Alfred the Great up to today. So something we've done a lot of times before, but something we haven't done for a very long time.
Eventually, every denomination will carry the King's image. They'll be introduced on demand to ensure the cash flow keeps coming. Howell Griffith, BBC News at the Royal Mint.
All right, let's get the latest weather forecast for you now. Here's Ben Rich. Hi, Ben.
Hi there, Ben. Thank you. Good afternoon. Our extraordinarily mild spell of weather continues. It has been very persistent, and actually where you get yourself into some sunshine, it feels really warm and will continue to do so into the weekend, staying very mild, quite windy with some rain at times. Now, we've already seen some very heavy rain in places today. The radar picture shows that it's been driving northwards and eastwards. It's clearing just about all areas now, still lingering across northern Scotland. We will see some rain in the Northern Isles through the rest of the day. Elsewhere, some spells of sunshine, 1 or 2 showers, particularly in Northern Ireland. Will stay quite windy out there. The wind's only slowly easing through the rest of the day. These temperatures, for some, a little down on where they were yesterday, but still well above where they should be at this time of year. Now, through this evening and tonight, we will see more rain pushing its way up from the south. The winds will continue to ease a little, largely dry across the northern half of the UK. Temperatures generally between 8 and 12 degrees as we start Saturday morning. Now, the weekend weather maker is this area of low pressure. It has been with us for quite some time now, feeding another area of wet weather northwards, but also continuing to import this very warm air from a long way south. See those orange colours surging across the chart. Tomorrow is really going to be a very mild, warm day if you get yourself into some sunshine, but it won't be sunny all the time. Cloud and patchy rain pushing northwards across England and Wales. Heavy rain into Northern Ireland, some of that into southern Scotland. Northern Scotland likely to stay dry for much of the day, and some further heavy showers, maybe with some thunder and lightning feeding into Wales and southwest England. 14 degrees for Glasgow, but 22 in London. Pretty extraordinary for late October. Now, through Saturday night, we'll see this rain pushing northwards, so quite soggy for a time across Scotland. Stays fairly breezy. And don't forget, as you head to bed on Saturday night, put those clocks back an hour, the end of British summertime, to take us into Sunday morning. Now, for Sunday, bit of rain to clear away from the southeast corner. This is actually a frontal system, and behind it, we do change the feel of the weather slightly. It starts to feel a little bit cooler. Will stay windy on Sunday. There'll be some further heavy showers, perhaps some thunderstorms into the west. Still, these temperatures above where we'd expect them to be, but just not quite as warm by this stage. And that theme continues into next week. Those temperatures will continue to drop away, but low pressure remains in charge of our weather, so there will continue to be some pretty heavy rain at times. Ben.
Thank you very much indeed. And that is all from the BBC News at 1. So it's goodbye from me, and on BBC One Now, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.